Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Hi, Marcy.
Hi, Sloan. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. We are going to let folks trickle in here. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Give a few minutes for everyone to settle in. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Marcy, how's the weather in Boston on your side of the office?
Well, Sloan, out this window it looks a little cloudy, but at least the rain stopped.
All right, we'll take it. We
I
will
know you
take
don't have windows, so
No, no windows over here. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We will get underway shortly here. Give folks maybe just another minute to settle in and we'll get underway.
I think interestingly, Sloan, it looked like from the attendee list we have folks coming in from across the globe.
I love that. I love having a global audience. Let us know where you're popping in from. Always love to see what countries we have represented. So awesome. Well, Marcy, what do you think? Should we kick it into gear?
Ready to go.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Happy Wednesday to those who are joining us live, and happy whatever day it is for those of you who may be catching us on demand. Excited to unpack what I think Marcy and I would agree is a pretty meaty topic, and one that is very near and dear for us here at Blink, and that is kind of centered all around kind of the solutioning for and solving of the frontline employee experience puzzle. You will see kind of puzzle kind of that metaphor kind of woven throughout, and I think it's actually quite descriptive of the journey that we're all on, in solutioning for something that I think isn't easy. It's not one of those kind of puzzles that my kids have that's like 10 12 pieces, but it's more those 1,000 box versions of puzzles. So looking forward to seeing and also getting some engagement in the best way that we can, obviously in a webinar format, but please kind of use the chat, ask questions, commentary, concerns, thoughts, feelings, all of it. Use the chat for it. We'd love to hear from you. So just kind of a quick by way of introduction, my name is Sloan Kendall. I lead global partnerships here at Blink. So my team's remit is all in and around kind of the development and working with our ecosystem. That's everyone from our kind of technology and integration partnerships, that side of the ecosystem, all the way to kind of the boutique and large scale consulting firms who are working with clients in the throes of these kinds of conversations, broader transformation work, and then also kind of narrowing in on specific investment into kind of digital employee experience. So I'm excited to be here, and even more excited to be joined by my partner in crime, Marcy Patterson. I'll let you introduce yourself, Marcy.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Marcy Patterson. I run our solution consulting team here at Blink. Essentially, we partner with our sales teams to identify the particular use cases a customer or a prospect might be looking to solve. We map our capabilities to those use cases, and then we sort of ferry that use case identification over to our implementation team to make sure that we're putting you in the best possible place for success as you go through the journey. So thrilled to be here today.
Awesome. Well, great. And I think, that we have the pleasure of being joined by, some familiar faces from customers and organizations that we've been, kind of communicating with over the last few months, but definitely some new faces in the room. So for those of you who may be, meeting Blink for the first time, just a little bit of foundation for you on Blink 101. So we're an employee engagement app that is really purpose built for frontline teams. Again, that's why this topic is so near and dear for us. So, and we have the objective of really helping organizations from across the likes of, retail, hospitality, healthcare, manufacturing, transit, logistics, you name it, feel at their core more connected and providing their employees with, I think the most operative word here will be simpler and more engaging digital experience. So a big part of that kind of simplification effort, kind of, and weaving that into the digital experience is making kind of critical systems and communications easier and more frictionless, or reducing friction. I shouldn't say more frictionless, but just easier to navigate, right? And a big part of that comes in the integration of and kind of sitting and coinciding with larger scale employee systems. Think of the Workdays and ServiceNows of the world, and as a result of that, we've been quite intentional investing in those relationships. We are a part of Workday Ventures portfolio. We are a Platinum Innovation Partner with Workday. We work as a part of the ServiceNow Build program, all with the effort of kind of bringing the value of those systems forward. And as we go through some of the customer examples along the way here, we'll certainly kind of bring to light some ways that our customers have navigated kind of sitting alongside those critical kind of infrastructure and systems, but knowing that that's a really important consideration of, again, simplifying that frontline employee experience. So that's a little bit about us. So maybe Marcy, as we kind of navigate here in the kind of how do we level set a little bit on kind of like this frontline specific employee experience, like what are the nuances, the challenges, kind of what is the complexity, what is that really rooted in? Would love to have you shed some light there.
Yeah, sure. So let's unpack that a little bit. And so, we're talking today about sort of solving the puzzle of the frontline experience. And what we are seeing is that there are a lot of organizations who have spent millions of dollars, quite frankly, on digital transformation. Perhaps more recently, you're seeing a lot of that investment go into AI use cases. But notably, a lot of that money has been spent either on the back office from sort of a workflow and automation perspective, or it's been spent on employee experience initiatives that serve what we would call a more traditional desk-based or knowledge employee. So bringing capabilities like knowledge bases and intranets and document management systems, and again, more recently, chatbots and AI agents, all to the table to service that desk-based worker with the goal of improving experience, but also improving productivity. Unfortunately, very little of that investment has actually been focused on the frontline experience.
Yeah. And we'll, again, I think the kind of unpacking of the other elements of that frontline experience that are unique is a perfect way for us to kind of level set here, and love to, specifically from a systems infrastructure standpoint, would love to kind of unpack that one even a little further.
Yeah, so you think about the desk-based worker, the traditional knowledge worker, you think about sort of this back office automation. And again, when we think about sort of why the frontline experience has been maybe put on the back burner, I think one of the biggest reasons is this proliferation of these enterprise platforms. Mm-hmm. I actually spent 8 years prior to coming to Blink at ServiceNow. And I know we've done a lot of really great work with Workday. A lot of investment has been made into these sort of heavy lift, all-encompassing platforms that are, again, fit for purpose for corporate and business unit capabilities, but they haven't been designed with the front line in mind. However, because of the level of investment that's been made, IT organizations in particular really are looking to squeeze value out of these platforms. So what you see is sort of these puzzle pieces from these enterprise platforms being stretched to try to fill the need of the frontline worker. And unfortunately, because they were designed for really a different use case, they're not necessarily meeting those needs. And in fact, we see where these enterprise platforms are trying to be leveraged to answer the frontline, to sort of solve for the frontline puzzle. They tend to have a high tendency for failure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know, alluded to kind of IT's kind of overall role into, you know, again, navigating and solving for this puzzle. And I think the other complexity that we see pretty universally, whether you're, you know, smaller scale, kind of emerging enterprise organization, all the way up to kind of, you know, the Fortune 500s, is this like cross-functional stakeholder group that all has an incentive to solve for that frontline experience, which I think in theory is a really good thing, right? There's more than one kind of group within the organization that cares or can acknowledge the fact that you know, improving that frontline experience is critical for a multitude of reasons. But with that also comes its own complexity, right? It is, everyone may have a little bit of a different perspective on what this looks like day to day, and may be kind of incentivized for, you know, a variety of different reasons to go about in solving for it. So, you know, you think about kind of these four groups in particular, you know, internal comms, they're obviously going to be caring a lot about how to disseminate down information and do it in a way that feels like it's reaching the whole of the you know, the employee base, not just those who can easily kind of digest it behind you know, a computer every day. IT, you know, Marcy, you've already alluded to, like, they're thinking about how do we, you know, again, get more value, squeeze more out of what already exists from an internal, you know, tech infrastructure standpoint. But then also, you know, if you're going to invest in something else with, you know, for a solution that's frontline centric, what risk comes along with that? What security considerations should they be having? Because it is a different mechanism of, you know, delivering or providing access, especially when you think about folks who are operating on their own personal devices. Operations, like, they're certainly invested in kind of the success and the overall experience for frontline teams, but they want to see the very direct impact on kind of efficiency of the day-to-day and how that access, how that information ultimately translates to a more productive day-to-day. And then HR, you know, they often will serve as kind of that champion for, you know, overall employee experience and you know, kind of what does EX, like good EX, ultimately look like. But they also have to take into consideration things like, you know, personalization, operating on their own devices, compensation for potentially operating on their own devices. So there's a lot in the stew here. And I think where, you know, obviously the kind of separation of kind of primary concerns is one thing, but then with these all, you know, these stakeholders all together, who owns the project? Whose budget is it coming from? Who executes, you know, day to day? And who's going to define ultimately what that success looks like? So again, it's just another kind of element of the complexity that gets added into the mix here.
Yeah, I think it's a little ironic that the visual we're using here is people raising their hands, where unfortunately more often we see people touching their noses. I think there's a recognition that this is a tough puzzle to solve, and it really sort of takes a certain coalition or particular change makers who are prepared to lean in. You know, we've talked about the desk-based worker. It's not necessarily easy for a traditional desk-based worker to navigate some of these corporate systems, to do some of these things across these silos. And then you sort of exacerbate that complex frontline worker who hasn't been working in that space for the last 10, 20, 30 years. And it really multiplies that complexity. But we've sort of talked there, Sloan, about two things. We've talked about the proliferation of enterprise platforms. We've talked about sort of accountability, who owns this this problem within an organization. Those aren't the only areas of complexity that lie in solving for the front line. So we've got a list here of other complexities. You know, if I look at this list, I would say The ones we hear most often from the organizations we're speaking to are probably around compensatory time. Organizations have a really hard time figuring out if they're going to have to pay employees for using an application that's perhaps on an employee's personal mobile device. The other one we hear about quite a bit is unionization, perhaps some concern about organizations who either have a unionized workforce or who are concerned about unionization. And then in addition to these other ones like language differences, high turnover rates, there's a lot of ways, there are a lot of reasons you can pretty easily talk yourself out of investing in a digital experience for the front line. But I think what we have to talk about is the why. Why do we do this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, embarking on that why, oftentimes we'll start with the process of quantifying, what is it that this is, cost implications for the organization. This is a good kind of summarization of that kind of cost of doing nothing, because I think that's an incredibly kind of important kind of starting point to determine, all right, if it's going to cost us this much, this is why we need to motivate the organization to kind of get behind a solution and kind of bring together again that coalition that we've already identified of folks who are should be involved in this process. So we spent some time kind of looking through what industry assessments can we kind of culminate to put like a real dollar value to, for a kind of typical frontline organization, what will this cost you if you break it down on a per employee kind of per year basis? So what we're seeing is approximately $80,000 per employee per year when you take into account things like recruitment, kind of onboarding cost. Think about compliance fines or costs related to kind of safety and injuries on the job. The cost, in summary, the cost of doing nothing is not insignificant, right? But ultimately, that is just one side of this kind of cost assessment coin. There is also starting to unpack what efficiency can we create? Where can we start to kind of reduce kind of existing cost in the business, but unlock kind of future savings, efficiency, productivity by solutioning for a challenge like this.
Yeah, so the business case, we're going to talk a little bit more about a business case here in a minute, and it's understandable that organizations have to create a business case. In my mind, there also is a bit of an obligation, sort of this digital inequity that exists between a frontline worker. You think about those investments that have been made for a knowledge-based worker. So there's a digital inequity, and there's also sort of potential, we talked about the AI investment as organizations are looking to make investments into productivity, into improved experiences. What are you sort of missing out from an opportunity perspective by not including the front line? I think these all have to be considered when you're building that business case.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, we don't want this to be all doom and gloom, right? We've spent, the first little bit here kind of, painting a bit of a, what is a realistic picture, I think, for all of these organizations. And it is not easy. There's a reason that we've used the puzzle metaphor as kind of a through line here. But, I think what's great is we've seen some really well executed solutions.
Creative.
Put in play from a number of our customers. And so we want to spend some time kind of, walking you all through kind of what we've seen work. So you can start to relate to some of these organizations because there will be like-minded profiles or look-alike organizations that you might be able to glean some insights from.
Yeah. So now we'll get on to the fun stuff. We've talked about sort of the why it's hard, what can sort of be obstacles to achieving engagement at the front line. So let's look at some of these success stories and how organizations have approached it, and also some best practices that hopefully you can learn from. And we're obviously happy to connect with you one-on-one, talk about your specific experience and figure out how we can do some capability mapping to that. But starting here with just some visualizations. The first thing you'll notice is branding. You really want to reflect your culture, your ethos when you're delivering an employee experience to the front line. It's an amazing opportunity to really celebrate your brand. And we have customers who have really leaned in here and they've had fun with this. And Sloan, you knew I was going to say it at some point. You can't forget the fun factor. You want to make this
have that tattooed on her back someday. Don't forget the fun factor.
You want to make it fun and engaging because the point is to get your employees to engage, and they're going to be much more likely to do that if the experience itself is engaging. So boring old school is not going to fly.
Yeah, agree. And I think that sentiment absolutely holds true when you think about, the content that's going into these kind of branded experiences. And it is warranted for organizations to kind of take a moment to really rethink the way that they're going about the delivery of content, and the way that, historically you think about, the look and feel of a SharePoint site, and kind of a long catalog of PDFs of information.
The link farm, as I like to call them.
Exactly. There's so much more engaging ways to kind of bring that information to light. And that doesn't mean that you have to throw all of that work away. And in fact, we never recommend that to customers, because so much kind of time and care has gone into the creation of sites like that. But how do you bring it forward in a way that brings that value to your employees in a way that feels consumable? And even if it's just that's the tip of the spear, right? Maybe the more in-depth version of it can continue to live in a playbook or a PDF. But how do you grab their attention through kind of user-generated content? So that could be coming, from the office of the CEO in a video format to, frontline managers, or unlocking the opportunity for, contributors on the front line to kind of have their voice heard, share their best practices and, what's worked for them. It is far more memorable to do that in those maybe snackable kind of video or image led ways, as you can kind of see some examples of that from our customers here. And I think, it just adds kind of this human element to the business. And at the end of the day, I think we've all grown quite accustomed to digesting content very differently than we had, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So how do we, kind of modernize that kind of content digestion process? And, ultimately, I think, we hear this every day too. There's, customers or organizations that get a little fearful of that kind of handing the keys of content creation maybe to their employee base. And we recognize and can understand that maybe it's a crawl, walk, run approach that we take to kind of, getting the field involved in kind of, again, in the submission of our contribution to content. But ultimately, where we see the best engagement, the kind of the most fruitful efforts is rooted in that kind of employee contribution and employee recognition as well. So just, giving an opportunity to kind of, highlight what's happening kind of like in the throes of the business has resonated incredibly well. And we see it working every day for customers.
Yeah, it's funny on that last slide where we were talking about some of the obstacles. One of the obstacles we didn't talk about is sort of mutual trust. I think what you're saying as you think about that user-generated content, as you think about organizations who are afraid to open sort of the Pandora's box. There is fear there. We understand that, but we have approached it, as you said, in crawl, walk, run, and using moderation and guardrails so that you're not necessarily opening up Pandora's box, but you are opening up that two-way communication. So definitely ways to approach that. You also mentioned employee recognition. we know that employee recognition, particularly peer-to-peer recognition, whether it's a nurse on the floor recognizing another nurse, whether it's somebody on the front line of a retail organization thanking a peer employee for jumping into a particular tough situation, that peer-to-peer recognition is a great engagement driver. Yeah. And sometimes to create a business case, you really need to find those drivers. You maybe need to look at your strategic initiatives for your organization for the year and figure out how you can peel those back and align them to specific things at the employee experience level that will help drive those initiatives. And again, as we talk about sort of creativity, this is just an example of a value realization exercise that we conduct with our customers to understand what those business objectives are, tie some very specific operational outcomes to those objectives, baseline it, and track it over time. But we talked earlier about sort of getting creative. So our customers have taken really creative ways of aligning to those strategic initiatives. And so one of our customers, sorry, Sloan, if you'll go to the next slide.
Oh, yeah.
One of our large retail customers helped to fund their initiative by recognizing that their employee base actually closely matches their customer base. And so they're using that employee base as a mining opportunity to capture feedback that they can feed back to their vendors. So it's sort of market research within their own employee base, which makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. The other interesting example was one of our large hospitality customers. What they know, this is sort of a very bespoke experience that they're delivering to their customers. And this sort of transition of somebody checking into to one of their locations is really based on the ease of transition from when they come through the gate to they get to the front desk to they get to when they get to their room. And so they're using Blink's voice and video capability, which is organic on the platform, to make sure their employees are very seamlessly able to connect quickly with each other without having to store phone numbers, without having to use their data on their own phones. So that's been a huge win for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll kind of keep it rolling with some other kind of great actionable wins that we've seen from across the customer base, and all in that kind of spirit of that value realization framework too that Marcy had shown the snippet of. How do we have very distinguished kind of areas of impact like that could live in a spreadsheet, and again kind of make this cost actualization or cost efficiency like very, very actionable. So we've got another global transit customer of ours who on an annual basis was spending nearly $500,000 just on printing pay slips. That was just like this hard cost they were sending.
And Sloan, sorry, this wasn't 10 years ago, was it?
No, it was in 2024. This is not, a system of old. Like this was a very recent example, and it was, simplified like pretty easily by, just being able to provide single click access through SSO into Workday so that those teammates could view their pay slips on demand. They would get, they receive notifications to say that there's a new pay slip available to them. But if, for whatever reason they wanted to go back and, confirm payment or, for tax purposes, be able to kind of easily access those, it was that simple of a process that removed again, $500,000 off of, a P&L. And ultimately they were able to then take that budget and reinvest it into the business and reinvest it into their employees specifically. So they were actually able to put that towards Workday Learning to help kind of, continue to advance, provide access to, kind of new learnings, new skills for their employee base. Again, all in the spirit of, keeping employees kind of engaged, feeling like they're kind of being moved on a journey through new opportunities within the organization. So a pretty powerful one, even though practically it was actually quite simple.
Yeah, and that payslip example is just such a good use case also for overall consolidation. Again, when you're talking about that frontline experience, We know that a lot of organizations have actually tried to solve this puzzle, but unfortunately have sometimes ended up creating more complexity by delivering multiple mobile apps, by expecting their frontline employees to understand what what ServiceNow or service request is, or what Workday is, and they may not understand that. So looking for creative ways to get these solutions in the hands of a frontline employee, but doing it in a very frictionless way, and also in a way that really minimizes change. One of the things that I've learned here in the 3 years that I've been at Blink, which I didn't recognize before, is that a lot of organizations in a frontline workforce have a tendency to change payroll providers. This particularly happens with large global organizations who may be using one payroll provider in one country and a different payroll provider in a different country, and maybe they're looking to consolidate. But when you think about the complexity of delivering those different pay slips to a frontline employee who doesn't know what necessarily ADP or Paylocity or Workday Pay is, they just want to click a button and get their pay slip. To be able to keep that seamless over time by sort of abstracting that complexity from the frontline worker is absolutely, there's a great use case right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where we've seen kind of our customers kind of operate most optimally and ultimately be able to, achieve over 90% adoption, see, 7 daily opens, from employees kind of, on a consistent basis, is really honing in on those moments that matter. And I think we've highlighted a lot of kind of operational effectiveness that our customers have, been able to kind of unlock in like these creative utilities of Blink. But it's even it becomes even a more beautiful puzzle ending when there's a nice combination of those operational components and cultural components as well. So yes, that looks like completing a task and kind of moving along the chain of effectiveness through your day, but that's also recognizing somebody's birthday, being able to connect peer to peer, to just have a moment of connection, especially when we think about like in-home care providers who may not interface with any of their peers or any colleagues on the day-to-day basis. So having an opportunity for connection, with a single chat to say, hey, how's your day going? Like that's incredibly meaningful. And I think it can't be emphasized enough the power of really recognizing great work, highlighting an employee on a given day for doing something that like really underlines the cultural values of the organization, and that just has helped to move the organization forward. It's always a great opportunity. It's never a bad day to highlight good work. So I think these moments that matter are a perfect kind of like culmination to that secret sauce that that are the organizations again that are doing DEX the best have been able to tap into.
Yeah, and again, you just brought up sort of that the use case for the home healthcare worker who doesn't necessarily ever see any of their peers during their work day or their work week. And you think about tying that back to a business case. One of our home healthcare organizations was able to establish a very clear business case by looking at 90-day attrition and figuring out what was driving that high 90-day attrition. And it was really about that connection engagement, that new employee feeling a little bit lost, a little bit disconnected, and that was leading some of that attrition. So sort of creating a business case on making sure that person's feeling connected, making sure the manager is tied in and reaching out, being able to measure that, being able to nudge the manager. Again, we talk about sort of layering these use cases. Once you've created that platform, there's a lot of opportunity there for improvement for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that, that measurement of, what does good look like, I think is well kind of encapsulated here in this kind of like checklist of all of the kind of bases that have been covered to, optimize for that frontline experience. And in our eyes, like these, again, like when we reflect on the customers that have done this very well and have been able to align, their utility of Blink to those kind of parent strategic initiatives, these are the boxes that they've been able to tick. So it's that puzzle ultimately comes complete when you've created a personal experience. That is really tailored to that individual, their role, how they operate day to day. Doesn't feel like fluff or noise, but rather kind of like really specifically for them. You're also helping to empower employees, kind of help them feel like they're a contributing part of the business and not just a number, right? Not just kind of an ID number at the end of the day, but really kind of contributing to the overall, again, that ethos word, coming back to rear its ugly head, but that ethos of the business. It's accessible to everyone. So, no matter what your working patterns may be, if you're just constantly on the go, again, if you're operating in a silo by yourself or you're on an assembly line, kind of it feels like it is, easily available to you. And then that kind of, again, connection to the culture, like how do you kind of feel like, again, contributing to and feeling like you're being, able to reflect the day-to-day kind of cultural pillars of the organization in the way that you operate. And that kind of like effortless feeling. Like we don't want, folks to feel like it's laborious for them to go find information or to connect with a peer. They want us to feel like we've like really reduced the friction and just made it enjoyable at the end of the day. So like if you were to put a 5-star rating, like how was that experience? There's a level of consistency and like, yeah, that felt great. And maybe, dare I say it, fun, Marcy.
Fun fact.
That fun factor is back. But yeah, that's kind of the sentiment ultimately we want to help organizations drive home.
Yeah. And, I know we have a lot of different types of organizations on the phone today, and we talk to a lot of different organizations every day. I talked about that use case about high 90-day attrition, but then we also speak to organizations who don't have an attrition problem, who employees have a tendency to stay for 20 to 30 years. And so the problems that they're looking to solve, the puzzle that they're looking to finish is quite different. But what is unanimous is that once you've sort of created, we actually drink our own champagne here at Blink. So we use Blink as a platform, and we share a lot of our own internal stories. And, nothing makes me happier than hearing about customers who have started with maybe a crawl, walk, run, and now they're sprinting to new use cases that are helping them to continue to extend and expand this connection. The point is, once you've created this fascia, this sort of communications network with this hard to reach employee base, what else can you do? As you look at invoking AI use cases, as you look at improving productivity, if you're able to extend that and open that pipeline of innovation to include this frontline workforce, I think what you can find is that you open up, as it says here on the slide, endless possibilities. And that's when it really does get fun, not only fun from sort of using a fun employee engagement app, but fun from the use case of solving real business problems for your organization.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's where we'll leave you folks. I think we, obviously strongly encourage you to and get in touch. We're always happy to set up, more concentrated time with, every organization that's interested of like getting into the weeds of what this could look like for you as, again, the business challenges or the puzzle pieces that you're looking to piece together, what you're working with and how Blink can kind of be, malleable to help you in solutioning for that. So please get in touch with us. I'd love to kind of walk you through the product, show you our stuff, talk through more of these customer use cases, and goes without saying that kind of that value realization component too. I think it is so specific to each organization, and we've seen a lot of versions of it. So would definitely invite you to, have a conversation where we can start to maybe, piece together what that could look like, and what areas of impact will be most critical for you. So, there's other stuff coming down the pike. So we've got some other content that if folks are interested. We have a webinar coming up on November 12th. One of leading voices in internal communications, Joanna Parsons, will kind of join us for a conversation of kind of diving into the hot seat, very literally on fire there in that image, but kind of unpacking kind of the what is kind of the most burning issues, burning challenges for internal comms, narrowing in on kind of that kind of that stakeholder group, what ICs are kind of thinking about and feeling every day. So definitely join us for that. But until then, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to hopefully continuing the conversation with many of you, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, Marcy, too.
Thank you.
All right.